Hello and welcome to this episode of Dynamics Update. This is one of the ones that we are doing an interview, but with me as usual I have Gustav. Hi Gustav, how are you doing today?
Hello, Johan. How are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm fine. And today we actually have an interview with someone that I've been trying to hunt down for a while, and which I think is a really exciting person. We have an interview with Joris de Gruyter, Senior Program Manager for Dynamics 365 Dev Tools at Microsoft. So, which means that he's working with Research Studio and X++ and everything. So, Joris, please tell us a little more about yourself.
All right. Well, I'm Joris de Gruyter. I'm the program manager for, I used to just do F&O developer tools, but these days I guess we call it developer experiences because we're doing things around Dataverse and other things as well. So I've been at Microsoft 6 years in various roles related to Dynamics F&O, really. But I have a long history with the product in consulting. I'm from Belgium originally, but I actually live in the Seattle area. So I did a couple years of consulting back in the 2.5 and 3.0 days, and then moved to the States and ended up at Microsoft. So
welcome to the podcast. How should we start? Because you're one of the people that I was told to follow in on LinkedIn and on Twitter and so on when I started working with Dynamics, which wasn't that long ago. And I really especially find your Twitter feed really entertaining. So you are like the developer program manager. What have been the most interesting challenges in the move to Dynamics 365 for finance and operations?
Easy question, right?
Well, actually, no, it's not. The move to F&O and the cloud coincided with my move into Microsoft. So in some respects, some of my experience went out the door the minute I started at Microsoft, because as everybody was changing the way they were doing implementations and doing cloud, I started here. So I mean, the challenges, I think coming from the outside into Microsoft, you start seeing the challenges, right? Where before, when you're in market and you complain about support or how they fix or don't fix your issues, and then you see why or what the back end of that is. You learn those things. But then I think for the cloud, it's been an interesting change for Microsoft, where, before the product was on a 5-year or more cycle of R&D and then putting it in market, and then market team taking it over and the product team moving on to the next. These days it's, where the engineers are on call and if an AOS crashes somewhere, then somebody gets called out of bed. That's been a big change. As partners, partners used to do this all by themselves, right? If a customer went down, they had to go in and fix it. And realistically, because of that, sometimes issues were not reported, or it was, if Microsoft said, well, we're not sure if we're going to fix it, partners kind of said, well, forget it. We'll just do it ourselves. That has been a major change, right? Whereas as partners in the beginning, we're very concerned that, we can't fix all these issues that we used to do ourselves. And from a Microsoft perspective, that, well, the idea is that you don't have to fix it yourself. We should improve the product, right? And so, exactly. Of course, I think there's been a lot of learning on both sides with regards to this. And I think, I don't know how long you guys have been with F&O or the product, but I mean, it's come a long way in the cloud. I feel like a lot of issues have been fixed that were probably there for maybe decades even, right? That were just never reported or never urgent. But all of a sudden, as we as a Microsoft are responsible for keeping it up to date and keeping it running, and a lot of these things have come to surface that some of them were core issues that had to be solved. I think still today, there's still every now and then there's some sort of memory leak that maybe it gets fixed and found, stuff like that is probably has been there forever, right? So, but now we're getting the telemetry. Absolutely. We're seeing I don't know how many customers running live systems, and you start fixing some deep issues as well, which is cool.
Yeah, and also with one fix, basically, right? Instead of doing it 100 implementations around the world, fixing the same thing, now you can draw the same conclusions, mostly due to the local regulatory issues, etc. So I think I agree that must be the biggest gain from this, the central.
But it's been a challenge too, right? Now. I mean, the way the organization worked with the product, how it's supported, how we think about the next update, all of that has drastically changed, right?
Yeah, I understand. From my perspective, me and you want to come from the consulting background as well. My earliest version was 3.0, I think, so I've been with it since, etc. And in every up until and including 2012, a lot of the correspondence with Microsoft is like hotfix related, sometimes kernel updates, reading up on what's coming, but until the release stops coming, basically. But everything, like you say, we have an issue here. Usually the issue is kind of critical. It takes a lot of time, so the partners, we fix them ourselves. But now that's an entirely different ball game. Not only technical, of course, that's the pretty easy game technical wise to see all this telemetry, but also the discussion towards the clients and everyone who uses the system. It's not only client customer, or it's client customer Microsoft, or none like we're hoping to be like only client customer or client Microsoft specifically. Just the relationship and the long-term investment is much different than it was with the on-prem installations we had before.
Yeah, and I would like to add as well, I started working with Dynamics just like a year or so before the first F&O release. So my first implementation project was, I think it was 8.0 or something like that. So I've been working with it for a while, but I don't have that much experience of 2012 and 09 and so on before that. I've gotten most of that afterwards, but I come from a Microsoft-centric infrastructure background. So my questions are very much in line with what you have experienced. So my first question when I got there was, so how do you do patching? Well, that's sort of a tricky question because we try to avoid it most of the time. And also this thing that you just explained, the thing that customers and partners actually tended to, when they have a support issue, they tend to ignore Microsoft and just say, oh, crap, we do it ourselves instead. And I think that inertia is actually there still, because I have customers who have been upgrading since 8.0, 8.1, 10. Something, and they are still like, no, we haven't really filed this issue with Microsoft. Okay, why not? Don't you want someone to fix it? No, they won't anyway.
Yeah, and I think specifically with, you talk about the 8th release, right? So in the 8.1, I think, is when we stopped the overlayering system for X++, which that was a major change, right? It was a big shift in a lot of things. And I think there as well, a lot came out where partners I talked to were very concerned. They said, well, we have all these things, we have to move all this code. But then when you talk to them, it's like, well, some of the code that they put in customers are technically fixing problems in the basic product, or things they feel like is just completely missing. And it's like, well, I get that, but that's where that collaboration needs to, and I think we've come a long way that way. We're getting a lot more issues that either we find ourselves or partners have been forced to say, well, we can no longer fix it themselves. So now we have to report it, but then they actually do get fixed. So, it's.
Yeah. And the community driven development as well.
That's
been
is very
fantastic
cool
as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of those measures taken. I think that the sealing of the application was, of course, the big step. A lot of people got nervous there, and including me. Not from I think the overlaying was nice from a feature perspective when we built stuff, but in the end, you ended up with a lot of broken installations around the world, and they all said Microsoft. So it was a good.
Yeah, good I think from a technology perspective, I think we had a handle on it, although since then we've made added new features for extensibility for sure. I think the major challenge was really that the application, there were whole modules that were built so that you could easily overlayer them. Like they wrote the code so that you could extend it by overlayering. And so all of a sudden when you turn it off, you find out that, oh, shoot, there's a lot of this functionality that just... is not built for, so I think that was a challenge, and we try to add a lot of features to be able to give you some options while the teams, went through extensibility requests and community driven. And so, I think still today, every now and then you come across a customer that files an issue. They say, well, we're trying to do this and we can't. And you're like, wow, but it's really because the code was really never designed, right? Some of especially the older code was designed to be overlayered pretty much,
It's built from 2009 and upwards, but yeah, exactly that. And I think also, I mean, now one of my favorite features of the new platform, the capabilities that we have, is that you don't necessarily have to customize the ERP, because ERP is ERP. And we're coming into that, I think, and the whole convergence that you mentioned before as well, and the Power Platform, all of these components that are there available to us now to ease where you have a problem. You don't necessarily have to write X++ logic to solve that problem. You can solve it in a number of ways to save money, of course, from customized code, maintainability, etc. So I think that is Code Seal enables that in a whole different way, because we were never able to support it, or at least Microsoft as one key player. I don't see you guys been able to support that or maintain that on a cloud scale that we have now. So it's very that shift in itself. You don't take away the capability, you put it somewhere else, right?
Exactly. And I think it's kind of cool. I mean, taking a step back sometimes, because when you're in it, both on your side as well as my side, you're in it, you're in your day to day. But when you take a step back and see just in the last couple of years how the product has improved and changed, it's kind of crazy to think about it, especially comparing it with previous versions of the product, sort of the legacy versions, and even our competitors too, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy that I think most people didn't think we were able to do it. And even with the ceiling, I think a lot of partners and customers thought we were crazy. Like, how are you ever going to pull this off? And not that it was easy necessarily, but it's kind of amazing how far we've come and still have the same product, right? We have not had to re-platform or do all sorts of crazy stuff. It's kind of, it's cool.
I'm really impressed with specifically that, because I used to joke when we started implementing 8.0 to 8.1 that this is basically AX 2012 R4 with a web UI, because I mean the underlying structure was basically exactly the same. And I am so extremely impressed that Microsoft has been able to basically rebuild the entire system when in production without messing it up completely.
That's very cool.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to admit also when we got into it, I mean, there's a lot of brain power that goes into it, but you never know how it's going to evolve and how well it's, I mean, all you can do is all hands on deck and just has to be done, right? It has to be done. And we'll have a lot of
lines of code to go through as well. Yeah, and I still see some references to AX. I kind of reminisce sometimes when I'm able to go through code. I see the AX references. I know that one. That's going out. But it's cool to see that it's still there. I mean, a lot of it's built upon, like you say, Johan. I mean, it's very cool to do that shift while the system is live and operational, and you're able to do that without disrupting businesses, and that's really, really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Johan, do you want to discuss on your favorite topics from the whole platform convergence area? What's your take? I'm an old AX developer, so I attack it from like an AX perspective with like, oh, where's my bash job? Where is everything? Johan has a more high level approach, right?
Yep. So you actually sent me a link, a YouTube link from a talk that one of your colleagues did at a user group called AXE Convergence. And one of the things that I actually been a bit skeptical about when we started this journey was that we haven't really gotten the info. I mean, we have gotten the high level, like Ignite slides that talks about the roadmap in a very cloud fluffy way that doesn't really explain anything, but just tells you the basic direction you're going. And this was actually one of the first sessions that I saw that was really very specific in what you were trying to do and where you were going. And that's one thing that I really, really appreciated. And also, it really blew my mind when I started understanding what you're actually aiming for here. So, do you have any comments on like sort of the overall of?
We should maybe add before you answer, Joris. But we should maybe add that we'll link to that session on YouTube in the show notes later on. So if you haven't seen it, you'll
of course
look at it afterwards. So you get the kind of.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to it, right? It's one of those things where, depending on who you talk to, you could be given a whole different speech and still be talking about the same thing, right? Because there's so many angles. I think there's a power platform angle, right? Where you say, look, there's all these, you mentioned it before, all these great features where you can extend the system, in all sorts of different ways that don't involve X++ or F&O directly, but, with a Power App and all these kinds of cool stuff. On the flip side, you have, which, we'll have to say it as it is. It's been a problem for, before the Dynamics 365 days, where CRM and ERP were sort of loosely coupled systems, right? We sold them both, but they were never really tightly integrated. Like, I think, although there were some out of the box features, I think most partners implemented it with third-party integrator packages and all sorts of things. And so that's a different angle where you say, look, these, and as CRM has evolved into a suite of customer engagement apps, and F&O is now also being sort of touted as these different modules and different licensing options. You can't sell that as one package if they don't have a native way to talk to each other without require tons of setup. So that's, I think, a different angle, is to just make sure all of these business processes, we can sell them end to end, not just say, here's the F&O process and here's the customer engagement process, and then how you connect them. Well, here's a bunch of technology, because I think that's what was done in the 2012 and earlier days, is we had more frameworks to connect, but we didn't have a lot of sort of really business process end to end. So that's a huge focus. You see that in a lot of the Ignite sessions as well, right? We're very focused on just sort of business processes themselves, like end to end stuff. So, and then I think the second piece is just from a consistency perspective, right? We have very different systems to maintain. We have Lifecycle Services, LCS. We have Power Platform Admin Center. So any customer who wants to use bits and pieces of the Power Platform and F&O, they have to go to this portal for that. They have to go there for that. I mean, and those are all things that just, it makes sense that we clean that up. And as these systems converge, right? That's the whole point. So there's so many angles. And similarly on the DevTools side as well, we're trying to get to a point where you can, Dataverse has its own system with plugins where you can write C# code to handle things. We're plugging that in so you can handle F&O business events using a Dataverse plugin and things like that. And those things will progress. I think right now they're very focused on just like project operations, for example, right, is our first out of the box product that uses both F&O and CE as backends and integrates them. So they use this kind of stuff heavily. We've been working with ISVs also that have a foot in both systems that want to bring them together. So instead of writing custom integrations, they can use these things. But I think over time, you'll see more abilities where you say, look, you may end up for certain things having a choice to say, look, if you don't want to do it in X++, you could potentially write a plugin for Dataverse to do it, depending on what it is. So I think these things will definitely evolve, but it's cool to be sort of at the beginning of some of these deep integration points between the two platforms, although we sort of sell them as one, and you kind of use them as one, but we want to make sure they behave correctly as one as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but also one of the things that really hit me in the session was this sort of humility regarding you were not selling them as one product. You were selling them as a better together product. I mean, there is still the option to integrate third-party software using Dataverse, for instance, and that is actually one of the scenarios that you're pushing fairly hard. I mean, of course, you would like us to use CE and ERP together, but if we have something else, I mean, I still think that we can't really expect everyone to switch everything just because it's convenient.
But I think that mindset, that shift, and that humility that you mentioned, Johan, is very interesting for me as well. I think the inventory visibility app is one of my favorite subjects because it's really nice. I think it uses a lot of these components, and I come from a commerce background as well. And I know, a couple of years back, if you spoke about commerce, it's kind of the retail solution. It was never built around any other POS than MPOS, right? Modern POS, it was really hard to connect. You could do it with a lot of different ways, like connecting to the channel DB. This was the first time I've seen an official session from Microsoft where you actually, in the slide, include a possible third-party POS. And I think that makes a lot of sense because that is the reality that we live with. We have F&O, we might have F&O, we might have other Microsoft products, but the whole come together thing, that's the reality. If you use all Microsoft, sure, correct, good for you. Might be easier to connect, but most people don't.
Right, and that's the other angle, right? So I talk about there's the Power Platform angle and what that brings for F&O customers potentially. There's the angle of, okay, if you use CRM and ERP, how do you easily use those out of the box together? Yeah. But there's the other angle where we're saying, look, we want Dataverse to be your backend for whatever line of business stuff you need to build. Whether you use CRM or ERP, we don't really care. We want you to build it on the platform, right? And so there's a lot of effort going into also making sure Power Platform, regardless of dynamics, properly integrates with Azure, right? So that if you're using Azure Functions, if you're a native Azure developer, how can you leverage? Although we initially spent a lot of time explaining citizen development to people, but there's a lot of pro dev and there's a lot of benefits regardless of how you build apps. So having Dataverse as that backend, and if you use CRM and ERP as well, then all your data is there and all these things, that's what the name Dataverse implies as well, right? Is that
exactly. Yeah. You light up a lot of scenarios basically, and that's very cool. And a lot of people are still in that shift transition. You might, if you're on ERP, that I think that you're more prone to kind of do the real pro developer part because you want to control every data constraints, etc. But you might most likely also not fully live. If you've been in business for a couple of years, you might have a technical debt, right? So a lot of these Dataverse solutions where you can bypass ERP, you can bypass a full go live by just jacking right into Dataverse and light up a lot of different scenarios for lightweight development. I had a meeting a couple of weeks back where we built an integration just in Power Automate for during the meeting, and people were like, "Whoa, wow, you can do that now! Yeah. Wow, cool." And I think a lot of people are still not in that mindset where you don't necessarily need all of the tools. You can use pieces of them as long as you understand the big picture and how to make use of them in the best way.
Yeah, and that's where then if you are using Dataverse, and if later on you want to do more, then you're kind of already there, right? And hopefully things will light up automatically for you.
Yeah, exactly. That's cool. And business events was a real game changer. That component was in CRM for quite a couple of years. I think everyone cheered in that TechCon when we got the real firing of events from them. Yeah. It was built, everyone built it customized anyway before, so it was still there. But now it's a real framework for it, and that's super cool as well to build these scenarios as long as you keep it structured a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, now we had the event catalogs in F&O, but now those are showing up and have been adopted by Dataverse as well. So you start seeing all these things. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, you can subscribe. That's really cool. Exactly. And when the business events for me was really cool, different projects for like exporting data and firing events, the whole outbound integration perspective, your logic apps could then tie it together with the entities, etc. Very cool. But now with the virtual data entities, writable capability back as well, OData, you have kind of the full chain back as well. From a performance perspective. So, I mean, what's your take on that? That's the way to go forward, using like a lot of people might use only like F&O capabilities to have their integrations, not using logic apps or anything like that. But it's being able to use these functions. That's the good thing, right?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've always had in Dynamics, and I think Microsoft as a whole, like, sometimes there's different ways to doing the same thing, right? And we need to make sure that customers understand what the options are and why you would choose one over the other. Like, I think sometimes, we have to be careful we don't get too hung up just on showcasing technology, right? And I think that's where the focus on business processes is important, because then if internally we have that in our minds and we can give you an example of how we think you should be using this or how you could use it, that's important. And like I said, you can build an integration, you can do business events, you can use logic apps, you could use flow. Like, when do you use which and for what? Yeah. And I think that's very important to kind of point out these layers and when and how you would use them.
Yeah, and supportability as well, and like SLAs and for business critical processes, maybe not use Power Automate. Maybe you should go with logic apps in that case, exactly, if you want the real business critical solution. So I think that explanation is very very important as well, or that discussion at least.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I mean, we still have a lot of work and we have a lot on the roadmap around ALM, right? Because that's then the other issue you get into, where you say, look, of course, F&O is very strict on its ALM and how you deploy code and all that. On the CE side, they have a lot more options. They allow you to do a lot more things. As we, first of all, put LCS and features into Power Platform Admin Center, and we ultimately want all of F&O just to be entirely there. We want to keep a lot of the controls that we have. We don't want to impose them on Power Platform users necessarily, but they should probably have the option. And then if you're an F&O customer that uses CE apps and all the other Power Platform goodness, if you built a solution like that today, it's still, each one of them has sort of its own ALM story. So those are all big things we're working on is how to control the ALM story, the security, how to make sure that you can easily deploy between test and production, but not just F&O or CRM, but everything together. Those are all things that we're heavily working on right now.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've been a bit jealous about when it comes to from the infrastructure side, that going into this, learning that we are now running things in Azure, and the fact that I don't really get to use any of the cool Azure tools, especially in the ALM part.
Now I'm curious, like what? Give me an example. What would you like to use?
Yeah, you can use a lot of tools, right?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, being able to deploy environments directly with the automations in Azure, that's one of the parts. And also the things that you're referring to is that we have different admin portals for different things. So we don't really have, Power Platform is administered from one place, and Logic Apps is administered from a totally separate place, even though it tends to use Dataverse and Power Platform. So it is a bit, it's a bit jarring that you really need to understand all of these tools and you need access to all of these tools. There's no one place to do everything. And especially for me coming from the infrastructure side, I stopped working with infrastructure and started working with the Dynamics just after we learned PowerShell. So just when we started to get good at PowerShell, I went over to the AX and D365 side and realized there's no PowerShell here. Yeah. Oh, okay. No is a strong word, but not that much.
No, I think actually a lot of work is being done there. Like I said, there's one of the angles as well here is, of course, we want Azure developers to be able to use Power Platform regardless of Dynamics. As for that reason, there's a lot of focus there as well with, now there's a Visual Studio Code editor, for example, to do a bunch of Power Platform. There's a big roadmap for that. They've integrated Azure functions directly into Power Apps, so you can call them and using API management, all those things. I don't know if you saw the announcement that was recently about the Azure billing that we can do now. So you see that it's coming, right?
It is coming together, and especially one thing I realized looking at the Ignite session was the security features, which are you have a lot of security tooling on the Azure side. You haven't had that much on the F&O/CE/Dataverse Power Platform side, but you're actually coming there with conditional access and all of those things, which I think are really, really important, because I'm actually looking into trying to explain what we have for security in the F&O, in the Power Platform Dynamics side, and we realized that so because I'm starting with a paper on how to secure an Azure and an Office 365 environment, and then we look at how we should do it on the Dynamics side, and we realized that there are a lot of those things that we're using on the other areas where we can just cross them off because we are not able to use them, unfortunately.
And I think that's where the tighter platform integration will likely a lot of these things are being surfaced right now. Like if you look at how the security just between Dataverse and F&O goes today, since everything goes through data entities, from a data perspective, it kind of made it a little bit easy for us because data entities are secured on their own. But let's say we get to a point where you don't need an entity, but let's say and again, I'm not saying this is something we're working on. I'm just hypothetically, right? Yeah. It's like, let's say you could somehow through a connector or something, handle any table from F&O, call into any table in F&O. But that then raises the point, well, how do we do security on that?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
the security models are different. We don't really secure at a table level in FNO anymore. We secure it at sort of an entry point. So all of these things are bubbling up and are being discussed. Like, okay, well, things we're doing now work, but as we progress, like a lot of things.
Yeah, but it makes total sense, right? I mean, that's for me, that's interface design, because like we discussed before, you don't necessarily have to have all critical logic within the same system. You kind of take it out, you put it here, and they interface together. We don't care really about what you do here or what you do here, as long as the interface is working and it's secure, right? And that's the whole entity perspective as well. That was there,
right? But as we talk about, we're talking about platform convergence, right? Not necessarily platform integration. So, ideally, you wouldn't have to worry too much about adding a user in FNO and adding him in Dataverse and then making sure the security lines up. Like, these are all experiences that we expect over time should just be, you say, okay, this user needs access to this business process, and whatever that means on either side, it should just be taken care of, right? So those are all aspirations.
Yep. I mean, if I were to add one of the things to my wish list, it would be the conditional actions functionality, but within ERP, so that you could actually set rules that collaborate with the roles and things in ERP.
Right.
That would be really cool. You need to be on a corporate device in order to do this, and this. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, so. And I think that's something that the YouTube you referred to about platform convergence is something that's being explained from the very beginning. Is what we're looking at this point. As we try to bring them together, is for any feature that is being considered or added on any team within Power Platform, and FNO being part of Power Platform, it's like, okay, does any other product or platform already have something like this, and how can we leverage that or uptake it? Or when we build something new, we have to make sure it works on both sides, and so that's how these things slowly progress and converge.
All right, that's very cool. I think we are running a little bit out of time if we are sticking to our specific time. Thanks a lot, Joris, for a very good input, and it's very interesting discussion as well. I think for me, again, the whole deal breaker, the new platform, the convergence part, it's really cool that you actually see it used right now. I've been part of it since Power Apps was announced. I think I was in Barcelona that on Convergence, people were cheering. Now you can build apps on your own. It's really cool to see it now with the maturity that we've reached now, or you guys have built, to see it being used. But with that said, I think it'll be interesting to see where we get from here. With the whole, and I would love to have just one portal, not just LCS portal. If that's the only thing I get from this, I will be very happy as well.
That is definitely coming. A lot of people working on that. So
cool.
Yeah. So I mean, Gustav, you usually end the session with a question of your own.
I mean, if you have a favorite Dynamics feature, it can be anything in FNO specifically, because I'm very FNO centric here. It can be anything from a favorite form, from a piece of code. Do you have a favorite feature?
Oh wow, that's a tough one.
Maybe you don't work in FNO that much in the application itself.
No, less and less, right? Yeah. No, I think one thing that I've always appreciated just in general about FNO and X++ is that essentially the whole platform is pretty much open, right? So, you have, I love personalizations, for example, and I know a lot has changed, and I'm not even 100% up to date with like the new saved views features. And I know they've done a lot there to administer it, but something like that I think is super cool. And then if you start looking at it, the majority of that code is written in X++. So as a customer, as a partner, if you're willing to dive in, you can do some really cool stuff. And that's in general, I think, from an FNO perspective. And of course, it makes it hard because if you go that route, that's where updates get tricky and difficult, and you have to be very careful. You're not, putting yourself in a terrible spot. But the fact that you can see that code and modify it and extend it at a platform level is, I think, is super cool.
Cool. Very good answer. Thanks, Joris.
Thanks a lot for joining us today. It was really nice of you to be able to take the time.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be getting back to you at some point when you have something.
Yeah, as I have more concrete things to talk about and not all these things we're just researching. Yeah. Exactly.
Cool.
That's
Thanks
cool.
a lot,
That's
Joris.
cool. If nothing else, we will call you when it's time for Visual Studio 2022.
exactly.
Yeah. Oh man. Yes. Sure. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, everyone.
And
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.